Fantastic. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to many new members on what is obviously the most exciting committee of the Fire Authority. It's certainly one of the more detailed ones where we can get our teeth into some good chats. For those members who haven't been on before, we are a fairly loose ship, so we let people really chat and get into details. If you've got loads of questions, please speak up. It's not a heavy agenda today, but obviously certain members find things in delivery performance reports that they want to question, or there might be bits in here. I invite members to get into that. Officers obviously always have the detailed answers. But before we go, I think we've got a full house. No apologies for absence from anybody. Any declarations of interest? No? Perfect. And then the minutes of the meeting for the 1st of April are on pages 3 to 10. I'll move those. If a seconder, please. Thank you, Nick. I think you're the only one here with me. If we're all happy to accept those as correct record, I will. Right. At pace now on pages 11 to 24, which is the Service Delivery Performance Report. I'll hand over to our Chief Officer, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm standing in for Assistant Chief Officer Mick Sharman, who normally the one that will support you on this committee meeting, is on annual leave. And the way we've normally done it, because we've got two area managers who are your service delivery leads, and they'll take you through the response, prevention and protection side. So if there's anything obviously organisational that I can support, I will do so. But I'll hand over to Andy and Bryn for you.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, so we'll start with the response half of the report. So lots of the data in here is to the end of May, so that you will see lots of reference to year data. It's for the first 2 months of this year. So to start with the 2.1, up until the end of May, we've attended 1,916 incidents so far this year. That actually constitutes an increase in incidents compared to the same first two quarters of 21-22. It's an 8% increase, but that hasn't come as any kind of surprise, because obviously quarter one last year we were still in a period of lockdown, which obviously had an impact on the number of calls we were receiving. The increase in calls has been driven by an 8.8% increase in false alarms, 5.7% in fires, and 11.1% in special service calls. Now, obviously, special service calls include road traffic collisions, so that all equates again to the numbers being high because of lockdown last year. However, 2.2 talks about the annual figures. So in 21-22, we attended 10,096 incidents, which was a 12.28% increase on incidents attended in 2021, which again was obviously more widely affected by lockdown pandemic measures. Figure 1 on under 2.3 shows the split of incidents we receive monthly, and you will see from there's not really a very great variation over the last 4 years in terms of what we tend to attend month on month. Obviously there was a bit of a blip in 2021, again because of the pandemic measures, but everything is tracking as we would expect, I would say. So figure 2 in 2.4 talks about the types of incidents we've attended in the last 12 months. What this shows is that the incident type broken down by false alarm, fire and special service call. So false alarms and special services tend to track quite steadily across a 12-month period. There's not massive peaks and troughs across those, but with fires we have. So with fires, what we tend to see year on year is that we have a spike in the spring. They stay relatively high through the summer and then they drop off into quarter 3, quarter 4, autumn and winter time. The graph just sort of represents that really, just so you have a representation of what we tend to expect. And that is certainly what we're experiencing now. This time of year, it gets hotter, the sun comes out, we tend to experience more of what we call P3 fires, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But these are kind of like your low-level, non-life-threatening fires. Sometimes result in social behaviour, sometimes result in carelessness. They tend to have a spike in those as the weather gets hotter. So figure 3 in 2.5 just shows a breakdown of incidents per district. Now I think this is a chart that was requested by members previously. It didn't used to feature in these reports, but just to give a representation of where the fires are occurring, or the incidents are occurring rather. So not surprisingly, the vast majority of incidents we attend are in the city of Nottingham, 3,887. So over 35% of incidents are in the city. And then the breakdown by district is there, with Gedling being the lowest number of incidents at only 622 last year. So I've touched on priority types already, which 2.6 talks about. So we have 5 types of incidents within the fire sector. So P1 incidents pose an immediate threat to life. These are our most serious incidents that we attend. P2 pose a serious hazard to the environment or to property. And then P3 incidents are those lower level incidents that don't really have a significant impact or risk to life. So the chart on figure 4 shows the breakdown of incident types, and you will see that the vast majority of types of incident we attend are those P3 lower level types. And again, the chart there represents that spike in those P3 incidents that we have in the springtime. So a key target under our CRMP is that we will attend on average incidents within 8 minutes. Now this is the time from when an appliance is mobilised till it arrives at the scene, the first appliance. So this is a metric that we scrutinise a lot because it's one of our key commitments in the CRMP. So what we can say is the year to date, again up until the end of May, we are exceeding that target. We have attendance time, that average attendance time has been 7 minutes 59, so just below that 8 minute target. Now figure 5, it's just over the page, shows the pattern of that attendance time over the last 12 months. And you will see from that in the vast majority of months we do achieve that, and on average we have achieved the 8 minutes. Now another very important measure for us is around ensuring that incidents are managed appropriately and safely. So to do this, we put in place monitoring arrangements, which is more often than not a more senior incident commander will go to monitor the person who's taking charge of the incident. So we task ourselves with doing this on 10% of incidents, not including false alarms, but more actual incidents that have a level of incident command. We will go to monitor what's happening. So we task ourselves with 10%, but you will see from figure 6 that we actually achieve a great deal more than that. We track at more than 20% each month that we are scrutinising what is going on in the incident ground. So it's a key thing for us around operational assurance and around health and safety. Another key metric is around the on-call availability. So we task ourselves at the service that on-call availability will be at 85%. That is what we aim for. Now, so far in 22-23, we're averaging 87.39%, so slightly above that figure of 85. Now, figure 7 shows how that breaks down amongst our on-call sections. And you will see from that quite clearly the areas where we do have significant issues with on-call availability. Now, Southall is a prime example of that. We have issues around recruitment and retention at Southall, and the knock-on is the availability at that station is less than others. What we have here, though, is that the highest levels of availability have been seen at like Hucknall, Miston, Warsop and Newark, who perform exceptionally well. So as I've touched on, the recruitment and retention of on-call personnel continues to be a challenge, and we are working on a project currently to look at refined pay and contract arrangements for the on-call, with the desire that it will make the proposition more attractive to more people. That project is well on the way now, well into about 9 months of a trial, and hopefully come September time we will have recommendations as to how to take that forward. So under 2.10, figure 8 sort of always takes a longer overview of on-call availability per quarter over a period of time since 1920. And you can see from this that on the majority of occasions we are tracking above the 85% standard. There's just one blip in 21-22 quarter 2 where we fell below that. Now, what members have asked for previously is that we have a specific focus on the day shift crewing stations around availability. So these are our stations at Ashfield and Retford, which moved to day shift crewing arrangements a couple of years ago. So what happens at those stations is that we have a whole-time appliance available from 8 in the morning to 7 o'clock at night, and then on-call appliances available during the daytime and then also in the evening. So year to date at Ashfield, over a 24-hour period, an on-call appliance has been available 83.4% of the time, so just below our target of 85. However, that is an improvement on what we saw in 21-22, where the on-call appliance was only available 78% of the time. So we are seeing an improvement at Ashfield. That section goes on to detail a bit more specifics around that. So, for example, during the daytime, the on-call appliance has been available 69% of the time, just below 70% of the time. But during the day, the whole-time appliance is there and available. During the night time, we've had at least one on-call appliance available 93% of the time at Ashfield. When they haven't been available, we've made other arrangements for other appliances from other stations to go and stand by at Ashfield, so there is cover remains there. Slightly different picture in Retford, where actually over a 24-hour period the availability in Retford has been over 91%, so far exceeding the service target of 85%. And similarly, slightly less during the day when availability drops to 84%, but then significantly more during the night time when availability is up above 96%. A key part also of this response summary is around the performance of our joint control. So as you'll know, we share our control with Derbyshire, and there's 3 key metrics this report talks around the performance of control. So the first one talks around the percentage of 999 calls that are answered within 7 seconds. The target for this is 96%. So figure 9 shows the performance over the last 6 quarters, and you can see that performance slightly slipped in quarter 1 and quarter 3, 21-22. But on average, we are hitting that 7% target and far exceeding it in certain periods. Second metric for joint control is around call handling time. This is specifically for those P1 and P2 incidents, the incidents that have more of a threat to either life or to environmental or property risks. The target for these is that calls will be handled within 89 seconds. Now, figure 10 shows the performance over the last 4 completed quarters, and call handling times for period quarter 1 and quarter 2. The call handling time on the whole has been below that 89 seconds on average, and in quarter 3 and quarter 4 at the back end of last year, it dropped to as low as 82 seconds, which is really positive. And the final metric for joint control is around the availability of the mobilising system. Now, the target for this is 99%. Now, the availability of the mobilising system unfortunately has fallen short of this target during the last 5 quarters, and we continue to have some issues with the system as it is currently. Now, at the minute, the work has begun around the replacement of the mobilising system, which is due in 2024, which will hopefully alleviate some of the problems we have experienced currently. The mobilising system, this doesn't mean that fire appliances aren't being turned out, because we have backup resilient systems, which means fire appliances are still mobilised, they're just not mobilised through our primary function, which is the Sistel system. And the final part of the report just touches on our exercise programme. So we have now in place a very significant exercise programme to ensure that crews, officers are being assessed and being monitored and being trained throughout the year. Now, 21-22 saw a full exercise programme being completed, which was brilliant because obviously there were restrictions in place, certainly at the start of the year around COVID, but we managed to complete a full exercise programme where every single crew, on-call section, officer attended at least one exercise. So our exercises vary in scale from what we call like a district level exercise, which might involve quite a minor exercise involving maybe 2 or 3 appliances, to a full-scale service level exercise, which would be 10 appliances, special appliances, over the border with resources, so on and so forth. We've also in the last year introduced what we call tabletop exercises, where a flexi-duty officer will go to every watch, every on-call section, twice a year to undertake a tabletop exercise, which has been very well received and a good addition to what we do. So just to finish on that, the programme for 21-22 is in place and well underway now, and no doubts that will be completed. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to prevention then, anybody got questions or comments on the response section of this? Okay, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I know we've had problems in terms of availability in a number of areas, including Southall or Southwell. Sorry for people.
I wondered who was going to weigh in on
that. I'm from the city, so we say Southall, but no offence to anyone from Southwell. And obviously in a number of areas like Eastwood, etc. Looking at the, I'm just wondering if things have changed post-COVID in terms of how we recruit. I'm not trying to be stereotypical here, but I imagine quite a lot of people who live in Southall possibly and working from home more regularly. And if we could do something with employers or get people, because obviously I think in the past if people were commuting, and my understanding is there'd be a lot of people who are commuting there, then obviously that's more of a difficulty. Now where working arrangements have changed, I'm wondering if there's any scope for us to put things out to communities or the public to say, well actually, now you're at home nearer the farm, you take part in what is an important public service. I mean, the same could be true of Eastwood, looking at it, I think, in a few other areas. So I don't know if that's an idea, because we seem to be stuck in a rut with it, don't we, in terms of, and it's difficult. Absolutely. It's the same places all the time, isn't it? It's good elsewhere, but those seem to have been persistent where we've got problems.
No, you're absolutely right, and this isn't something that's unique to Nottinghamshire. This is a sector-wide issue. But absolutely, you're right around people's working life has changed, hasn't it, from a pandemic. We all know that, and it is something that we will exploit. We try to exploit every opportunity that's there with on-call because it is such a finite resource. Now, within Response, we have a team, the Sustainability On-Call team, and their remit is really to try to exploit every opportunity like that. So we have continuous recruitment campaigns, particularly in places that we know we're struggling with, like Southwell and like Eastwood and places like that. So yes, absolutely, you're absolutely right, and it is something that we are working on.
Is that it?
Yeah, I
Yes,
think so.
all right, thank you. I think that's a useful point. It's obviously a perpetual problem we can come back to. And the pay and contract stuff for September, I think we've been hearing for a very long time. I think it might be useful if there's part of a report or from that team who present, who come and perhaps show us what they do to try and recruit so that we can understand it better and see if we have any bright ideas that have not been thought about. I know we talked about in the city students potentially being an untapped resource that we didn't typically go for. And obviously, parochially, my concern is always Ashfield. It's the only one on those lists that has changed the crewing arrangements. But I think it'd be useful for us to know how you target and what you target, because as Nick's rightly said, we're in a different world now. People work differently. So it'd be useful for us to understand that.
Well, we'll bring a report to you next meeting.
All
That's
right, lovely.
absolutely fine.
Thank you. Nicola?
Thank you. A couple of questions. On 2.1, the 8.8% increase in false alarm seems quite high. Is that just a reversion to normal?
It is unfortunately, yes. And we have we've recently changed the way that we approach false alarms in terms of what appliances we mobilise to it. So we've cut down on the attendance to false alarms in terms of going mob-handed, if you like. But yes, that is
Just a reversion to normal. Lovely.
Now
Thank you.
people are back in offices. Yeah.
And then I had a question on 2.8 about the monitoring for continuous improvement.
Yeah.
So your target's 10%, but you're probably averaging over 20. Is that the best use of resources? Is there an upper limit on how much you should be monitoring?
I don't think there is an upper limit, to be honest. It's really the more that we can, the better. And as incidents have dropped from the 30,000 that we used to receive, it's a key measure, along with exercise that we've touched on here, of actually getting flexi-duty officers out to be at an incident ground and to, if they're not taking charge, to observe other people taking charge. And it's quite an important part of their competency. So where we can do it, it's almost the more the better, if I'm honest at this.
It's one small part of it, because incidents have come down.
Yeah.
And I use the very broad metrics, and these are probably not to the decimal point, but about 5% of our time is firefighting, and about 30 to 40% is preparing to firefight, and this monitoring is part of that preparing to firefight, just to make sure that the skills are right of the crews as well as the officers. The more senior you become, the less likely you are to go out to an incident in many months, if years, in reality. So we've tried to fill the space that was actual incidents with the bits that are as close to it as we possibly can. Just back to the unwanted fire signals thing, it is a reversion to facts that was previously, but there are further measures that, depending on the level of risk we want to take on, whether we want to go to any of these unwanted fire signals and take a more risk-based approach, and that then frees up time to be going to do more proactive things. Well, that really means spending more time with a lot of the building owners who really ought to be pulling the socks up and having the right standards to avoid these happening. Some of the city hospitals, yes, they can be high risk, but they do have lots of people, lots of staff, and large teams in all relative terms dealing with these things. The sort of residential care home down the lane out in the county, I'd probably be more worried about.
Yeah.
Because actually they may not have the facilities, resources and things that can actually be doing what some of the city centre larger organisations can be doing. But we are looking at unwanted fire signals with a view to reducing that more, because I think that is an area where we can create some efficiencies to be doing more proactive things.
Yeah. So just on terms of that active incident monitoring, given the reduction in overall call-outs, should the target be higher then, almost numerical rather than percentage-based?
Possibly. We do review the targets annually, and we have settled on 10% because it's almost a sector standard, if you like. So it's several weeks ago where we're actually better than the sector standard. But certainly it is a target we would review.
Yeah.
When is that review?
It happens prior to the start of the year. So these are the targets that we've set for 22-23. So probably in about Q3 we will start looking at all the targets again, ready for 23-24.
Can somebody make a note of Councillor Heaton's point, because I think that's probably valuable that we
Yeah, of course.
particularly review if that one's out of kilter now as a KPI. Do you have anything else?
No, that's great, thank you.
Sorry, Roger.
That's all right. Thank you for the information. As a new member to the Fire Authority, I think I've got a pretty good grip on what you said. Apart from 2.17, which is all about the availability of the mobilising system. I'm quite happy to have a chat with you outside the meeting, but fundamentally, could you just briefly explain what that is to me and what's wrong with it and why is it being replaced?
We've had challenges around the system that we brought in, the mobilising system, our Sistel system that it's commonly known as. It's a ICT system, and it's shared across the tri-service.
Right.
And over the course of its life, there have been some issues with it. It's due to be replaced because the contract comes to an end. So the replacement in 2024 is around the end of the contract and looking for a new provider. Unfortunately, it's an ICT system where it occasionally has issues. But we have got resilience in place. We have got the BCM arrangements, so it doesn't stop appliances being mobilised. They're just not mobilised when it falls down under our primary system.
Okay, thank you.
I think it might be useful if there's stuff that new members haven't had the benefit of history of, perhaps if there's a bit of a catch-up for some of it, because obviously these are moving things where we're picking up. But if there's things you think of that might be like that, a bit of background might be useful, we can send it out to all members.
Thank you.
If nothing else on response, we'll move on. Bryn, are you picking up prevention?
I'll pick up prevention and protection. Yeah. Sorry if I'm talking to you about cats.
That's all right.
The room's been configured. So just for everybody's benefit, safe and well visits are where the fire rescue service go into people's homes and they look at a holistic approach to safety. So that's both our operational crews and our prevention department. And they look at all aspects of safety, not just fire safety, but slips, trips and falls in the household and the person's general sort of well-being and safety in the home. So last year we conducted just over 13,000 safe and well visits, which was up on our target of 12,000 that we set ourselves for the year. A couple of the key metrics that we've got for doing safe and wells is the number of over 65s and the number of disabled people that we visit as part of those safe and wells. They're key figures because those are the individuals that are sadly more likely to die in a fire due to limited mobility, due to the age and everything that comes with limited mobility and age. It makes them more susceptible. So our figures are indicating nearly 50% of our safe and wells have been delivered to the over 65s and just over half to the disabled. And nationally, we're probably on a par in terms of the over 65s. National average is about 48%, but well above the national average for disability, which is really encouraging because that means we're targeting the right individuals that are the most susceptible. So we're really, really pleased with that one. Moving on down, we've implemented a new vulnerable persons electronic module really on the tablets that the crews and the prevention department take into people's homes. What that means in essence is prior to the vulnerable persons module, we can do a safe and well purely on that person's home. It would be at an address, for example, 16th Smith Street, but there may be 2 or 3 vulnerable people within that property. And we weren't taking account and recording the needs of all those vulnerable people in the home. So this new technology that we've got now makes it bespoke and specific to those individuals in the home because there may be several different needs. You may have a partner who's got disabilities and another one who's got dementia, for example. We're recording it and trying to give advice according to the needs of that person. Very much in line with what the national sort of music is in terms of prevention, which is a person-centred approach. I smile when I say the mood music is nationally a person-centred approach. We actually devised that in Nottinghamshire, and the national trend is they've copied the work that we've done. So again, flying the flag for Nottinghamshire, we were one of the first at that. And Andy, in his former role as in prevention, was integral really in developing that. So in terms of that has now been rolled out and is being delivered to the crews. It's not been without its issues, anything with new technology, like we've just been talking about. As we've implemented the new technology, it's thrown other systems out, so we're working on that. But the principles behind it are sound, and we will continue to move that forward. 2.21, I mentioned this last week in the seminar. A lot of people are quite quizzical when we talk about a fire rescue service hosting an occupational therapist. They cannot see the link between an NHS occupational therapist and the work of the fire and rescue service. But if you think about the comments I've just made in terms of disability, in terms of age, absolutely our target audience are the same target audience as occupational therapists. And by working with a seconded occupational therapist, we've got inroads into NHS databases, a better understanding of NHS, and it is really linked with fire safety. Again, I mentioned last week at the new members seminar, we've had several incidents where we've done Safe and Wells with people with limited mobility. The smoke alarms actually operated, and unfortunately the person due to the limited mobility has not been able to evacuate the premises, which is really, really tragic. So one of the things we're trying to do is work with NHS to improve the mobility and improve the life and the quality of that person in the home, to not just for fire, but all around. And that has been key and really, really, again, well received, and we're a national lead in terms of the integration of the fire and rescue service with the NHS occupational therapists. Moving on down, as we speak, we've got a safety zone that is currently running. Safety Zone is our sort of school youth engagement programme, our showpiece event that we run across the summer months. Over the year, we'll target probably in excess of 3,500 school children, so it really is a sausage machine of children coming through this multi-agency event. We stage it all across the county, so we've got better reach, and we also try and target it at what we would class as risky schools. So schools where we know we're getting more operational incidents, schools where we know that we're probably going to have the greatest impact, and we try and encourage them to attend the events. It's currently taking place at Ramby House School up at Retford, just near the A1. So that covers the Bassett Law and sort of the northern areas of the county. We've got one running next month in Ashfield, so we're covering the middle part of the county. And then towards the back end of the year, we'll be doing one over here on city-based schools. Multi-agency events, so it's not just fire. So we're teaching the children about cyber safety, stranger danger from police colleagues. We have British Transport Police and Network Rail looking at the issues with rail safety and children playing on railway lines and vandalism, etc. And we also have Western Power looking at the dangers of substations and you know, if your ball goes over into a substation, you don't get it, this is what can happen. So it's quite interactive. It's not just all boring PowerPoint presentations. They have role players, they have actors, they have thunder flashes for the substation exploding. So it's really, really engaging for them, and really, you know, it delivers a strong message to them and something hopefully that they'll retain for the rest of their lives. Really. So again, a jewel in our crown. And then road safety. We do a lot of road safety interventions, a lot of the time in conjunction with Nottinghamshire Police. We've got something called Operation Highway. Operation Highway is where the Road Safety Partnership highlights more dangerous roads, and the police will do an enforcement campaign on those roads. And it's not just about speed, it's about dangerous driving. The police will pull the motorist over, and then there's a multi-agency education. It's not necessarily a prosecution at that point. It's talking about seatbelts, it's talking about child car seats, it's talking about the dangers on the road, making sure the vehicle's safe. So we're actively involved with that. We also do road safety awareness days across schools and colleges, targeting the 16 to 18-year-olds just on the tip, on the verge of starting driving. So we get them before they're out there on the roads, really, and get that road safety message across on the fated fall. Moving on to protection then, so protection is looking after the built environment, really. So that's the fabric of the building, as opposed to prevention, looking after the vulnerable people. We've got an aim to complete 12,000 fire safety audits in this year's RMP. And so far we've completed, well, from the 31st of May, it was 156 audits. All the fire safety inspectors currently assessing our supervisory managers. So supervisory managers, crew and watch managers, we're upskilling them to what we call level 3 fire safety qualification. That enables our operational crews to be qualified to go out and do low-level audits of businesses, shops, offices, etc. Not the high-risk premises, they will remain with the fire safety inspectors, but the lower-risk premises will be cascaded to our operational crews. Just to have a bigger footprint across the community and enable us to visit more premises. And we're labelling those business safety checks. You can see below in graph, in figure 12, the number of fire safety audits. You can see the key is that during 2020, 2021, and the early part of that year, really affected by COVID. Businesses were closed down, everybody was working from home, didn't allow the fire safety inspectors to get out there and conduct their audits in the workplace. That has obviously changed. You know, we're pretty much, I'm touching wood at this point in time, but we're pretty much returning to normal. So fire safety activities and inspections and audits will return to normal. Similar to what Andy says, though, the complaints and the number of fires and everything else goes up because we're returning to business as usual. So we're coming out of those strange conditions of pandemic. 2.27 just gives you an idea of the range of activities that the Protection Department undertake. So every time that there's a fire in a commercial premises or a non-residential building, we will send fire safety inspectors to have a look at that, to have a look at the arrangements that were in place prior to the fire, to have a look at their risk assessment, to have a look at their systems of work, really, and just to have a look at the premises, because it's had a fire, it's now on our radar, so we do send our inspecting officers in there. And you can see there's been an increase in the number of post-fire inspections that we've undertaken last year compared to the year before. Again, probably indicative of COVID and the lockdowns. Similarly, number of complaints from members of the public about block fire escapes, anything to do with fire protection measures in the building. We will send fire safety inspectors or operational crews to go and have a look at those and follow up those complaints that have been received. And of course, we have to do enforcement and prohibition notices, which is part of the course really in terms of that. We are going to do auditing. We have got an enforcement arm. We have got statutory responsibility for enforcement. We're also seeing a rise in the number of building consultations, and we think this is, probably due to the economy and probably due to the coming out of lockdown. There is a lot more proposals for new buildings going up, particularly in the city, high-rise residential buildings. So we're seeing a rise in the number of building consultations that we're involved with, which again takes quite a bit of work for the department, because some of these are quite complex buildings. If I talk about the 40-storey building that's proposed in the city centre, again, a lot of consultation work that's going to be required by the fire safety inspectors. Moving on to 2.28, we've got a reduction, 3% reduction target for unwanted fire signals. That's basically a fire alarm that's activated, and lift rescues. And again, figure 13 is indicative of where we've been with the pandemic, low levels of activity in 20 and 21. My anticipation is probably return to 2019 pre-pandemic levels, really, in terms of the number of unwanted fire signals. 2.29, once we get a unwanted fire signal to non-domestic premises, they'll receive a letter from us outlining their responsibilities in terms of fire safety and the legislation that applies with that. A fourth occurrence, so four false alarm activations, the premises will be contacted by one of our business safety advocates. Now, they're not fire safety inspectors, they very much go with an arm around the business, really, to encourage them to comply with legislation. Unfortunately, if they have the sixth occurrence, they do then get a fire safety inspector, and we're really going to start looking at that premise, mainly because if they've had 6 false alarm activations, it's probably indicative of poorly maintained fire alarms, poorly maintained businesses, and we generally find at that point that the fire safety audit is probably not where it should be. So again, we'll look to put improvement notice or prohibition even, and hopefully not enforcement notices on these premises. I'm sure members are aware that we're doing some excellent work with the joint audit inspection team with Nottingham City Council, and we've conducted 36 inspections and 27 re-inspections as part of the JATE, as we call it. JATE's combined of environmental health officers from the City Council and our fire safety inspectors, and the inspections have so far covered 59 buildings and over 6,000 units of accommodation. In essence, they're residential flats. Still got 84 buildings over 84 metres and 62 buildings under 18 metres left to inspect. Now these are complicated buildings normally. They've got a complex build environment, complicated fire engineering solutions, and they do take a lot of time working with the responsible person and the owner of these buildings to ensure that they comply. Of the 150 buildings so far inspected, there are only 2 that are fully compliant in terms of the fire safety regulatory reform order. So work is ongoing, and then you can imagine that's why there's such a high revisit inspection of these, because they're maintaining, they're bringing the buildings up to speed and completing outstanding works. And just to top it all off, we've got a new piece of legislation that is now enacted, which is the Building Safety Act, which again is focusing, make no mistake about it, this is on the back of Grenfell, on residential buildings above 18 metres. Huge piece of legislation that will affect the whole sector. They're looking at forming multidisciplinary teams at each of the regions across the UK to go around and enforce the Building Safety Act. That will be the Building Safety Regulator, which will be a multidisciplinary team headed by the Health and Safety Executive, but they can direct under law the resources of the Fire and Rescue Service to assist them as part of the Building Safety Regulator. Now, even as late as this week, we've been having conversations with the National Fire Chiefs Council and their Home Office of where the multidisciplinary team for the East Midlands is going to be, and we are pitching that, quite strongly, that we believe Nottingham ought to be the centre for that regional multidisciplinary team due to the high level of build environment. We've got high-rise residentials in excess of 200 buildings above 200 metres. We think we're perfectly placed as a fire and rescue service to be able to support the building safety regulator. And I'll pause there for questions, Chair.
Thank you, Bruce. Nick, I've got Q. Nick.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, first of all, I think we should celebrate or congratulate in terms of some of the stats we've got in the Safe and Well visits, because it's been a huge success, hasn't it? In terms of the officers and the staff undertaking those, I think it's brilliant. And as I mentioned before, I mean, I think Jake's absolutely superb. The work that's been done on that is really good, and I think, as an authority, we've done really well. Sometimes we're critical about things, but there's other things, like you were saying, that we've led on nationally, and it's a real success, and I think that's brilliant. There's a couple of things. I mean, you mentioned Grenfell, and obviously a lot of it's anniversaries, and a lot of us were thinking about that. And from a city point of view, obviously, a number of things that are changing quite rapidly that are of a concern. We mentioned the high-rise buildings, and Jake's looking into those. One thing that concerns me about what you said, and it's coming from a lay point of view, is the number of inspections, and then we've only got 2 that are compliant, and what measures we're taking, or the businesses are. In 230 and then in 229, I know, again, just in terms of 4 false alarms or 6, it's a bit of a numerical target. I don't know if there's anything qualitative, because we've had a lot of takeaways. They're one sector that I think's done quite well in COVID, and some of them, I'm imagining, aren't exactly that safe looking at them, some of them in my ward. So I'm just wondering if there's something we can do there, or is it just, we just do, is it difficult? And the third thing is, in terms of resources, as Nottingham's changing, you're getting more high rises and everything else, it's much more difficult for the service to deal with. Do we get resourced on that basis or not? In terms of other...
Because we mentioned that.
Yeah, well, because it's an issue, isn't it? We're asking staff to do more in more dangerous and complex environments. Yep. Obviously, we need more resources and more staff, I would suggest.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, Brendan, if you want to do on sort of detail, I can probably talk about a bit broadly about direction of travel, maybe.
So in terms of how we focus our attentions, we've got 45,000 businesses or premises that we need to inspect that come into the remit that could be inspected. Of those 45,000, we have to apply sort of an algorithm really to look at what the higher risk businesses, because we need to target our resources at the most high risk. So that gives us an arbitrary target of 10% of those 45,000. So 4,500 businesses that we need to target every 3 years. So we're looking at approximately 1,500 businesses. Not an exact science, but 1,500 that we need to look at each year. And the complexity of the algorithm will look at things like height of the building, previous incidents, occupancy, what materials are stored in there. So there is some science that goes into the buildings that we inspect. But you're quite right, it is really, really resource intensive, certainly high-rise residentials, and the complexity of the issues that you're finding. For example, one of the buildings we've got in the city centre, up until the point where we start doing an audit, we believe it's compliant. Then we start doing what we call an invasive audit, or invasive inspection, which is basically lifting ceiling tiles and starting to look into walls and cavities, which again was a key feature of the Grenfell inquiry. Once we do that, we discover that the compartmentation that should have been there as part of the building regulations is not there. And then you can imagine the myriad of work that then we've got, going back towards architects, going back to the contractor, the build, the responsible person, working in conjunction with the City Council, really, really time-consuming and complex. So the numbers are going to be fairly low. The work is huge. In my opinion, it's going to take a generation to remedy some of the faults that we've got in the built environment. This has not just occurred overnight. This has been, over decades, really, of poor build in the environment. But we're now aware of it. We can't not be aware of it. But you're absolutely right. We do need more resources and protection, like every other service does in the country. I don't know if you want to call the Chief in terms of resourcing and all that.
Yeah, well, I suppose in terms of strategy, in terms of your CRMP, Bryn touched upon business safety checks, and it might be assumed that firefighters all know about fire protection. They do not. And it's quite interesting when you go to the pub and people know you're in the fire service and go, maybe you could give me some advice. And I can't give them advice as a chief fire officer. I'm not competent and qualified to talk about fire precautions. So there's a bit of a myth around the fire sector about firefighters know about fire protection. We used to do some years ago, and then that was something that went out of favour, out of focus in the fire sector nationally. So the business safety check was targeted at crew and watch managers on fire appliances to that level 3. So the bulk issues, to look at the kind of the bottom end of the iceberg to see whether we've got issues here or not. So things like sleeping risk above takeaways in the city, and that is something that we need to kind of focus upon. So they'll do the bulk of the work and leave the specialist complicated buildings really for the fire protection team who have got higher levels of qualification, knowledge and experience. We made the decision that all crews would be trained in business safety checks. So we brought the crews in while they were on duty, took them off the run basically, and the firefighters were going through it as well, because my view certainly is that they should have an underpinning knowledge, and they may go on to be promoted to crew and watch managers and then be warranted in terms of doing it. So there's a succession behind that. The law is changing post-Grenfell and putting a very much more onus on fire authorities to make sure that the built environment is safe. But I've got no control over the building contractor. I've got no control over building control, approved inspectors, and all those kind of things. We're just one party to it, really. We can influence, we can lobby, we can do all those kind of things. What we are sort of seeing, particularly the city's a really good case study, I think, nationally, Councillor, in terms of what we're doing and then what we're seeing about the expansion and change in the use of buildings. And I'm sure that's replicated across the country. Fire protection is becoming more complex, so we're spending more money around trying to train people to be fire engineers, because they're now dealing with, consultants who are very, very clever people, and in many cases ex-fire officers who have gone on to kind of do it. We train them very, very well, and then they can go on and do it as part of their career. So we're finding actually investment in fire protection, if we want to get ahead of the risk, is where we're going to have to put some resource. That'll be something that will come back to you really as part of the efficiency strategy that we've talked about how we may have to shape and change the focus of the organisation. But that'll come with challenges. You've got a reducing budget. You're aiming at the moment, as best as we know, subject to confirmations, £2 million in reductions. So how do we do the £2 million reductions and focus on your statutory duties as well and deal with some of this risk that's coming? Because some of the things that Bryn's talked about, lifting ceiling tiles, is something that somebody may not do for 10 years while it's had people in it. And then what happens? So Grenfell, concrete building, built with a stay-put policy in the 19 whatevers, was probably perfectly safe, probably had flat fires in it. It probably had flat fires in it that never went beyond the purview of the one flat where it was designed to stay in. Put some cladding on it, change the design, update the look of it to make it tidy it up, and all of a sudden 72 people lose their lives and hundreds if not thousands of people are affected by it. And I'm talking about people in Leeds, can't afford their flats. So it's a complex issue. Not all the recommendations are being applied nationally by government either. So there is definitely some challenges kind of coming back. I think the J design, I've said a few times, Council, I think that is something we should probably focus on, is whether we can with the city to expand further. And we are working at the moment to see whether we can put more resources into fire protection as part of the ongoing CRMP. Comes with challenges. My job is to give you my best advice with the challenges that we face and whether we can do that or not.
I'm not sure there's much comfort out of that at the moment.
On the one face of it, to give some balance, we are getting more and more people qualified in fire protection on fire engines. And what that actually means is that they can go and look at the buildings proactively, see where there's an issue, understand the risk that residents and building users are facing, and then if they do go to those buildings where there's a fire, they've got a heightened level of knowledge where they understand how the building should be reacting. Because one of the things that has been mentioned lately over the last couple of 3 years is understanding the signs and symptoms of a building, you would expect it to react, but then you see it's not reacting in that way. Could that be because the fire precautions measures have been compromised in some way? So we're hoping, and I believe that extra level of knowledge and training that staff will get will make them better at the firefighting as well. It makes sense. How do we evaluate that over time? Not sure. But, we're trying to do what we can in terms of upskilling the workforce.
Yeah. One of the things that concerns me, I've mentioned this at the LJ with regards to Building Safety Act and business checks, is the changes to permitted development rights. So you've said 1,500 buildings a year out of 45,000. They're the ones you've targeted based on smart knowledge. Yeah. We don't, even local councils aren't being told when people are changing buildings. There was a single-storey music shop opposite our office, with permitted development rights, is now a four-story HMO. They've done that in 6 months. They don't need planning permission. But you don't know that's potentially a problem. We're not actually informed. And I think government need to legislate that it's still PD, but you need to notify somebody so that we can update records. Because there's you don't know what you don't know, do you? But there's a huge changes happening in the built environment that we, as the public sector, aren't at all informed of, that could present real problems and change them. And that building I'm talking about is a mid-terrace. It's gone from a single story to a 4-story in between 2 takeaways. And no local government's notified. We couldn't notify you as the planning authority because we're not notified. So at whatever level you can lobby, that there just needs to be a formal notification process. I think there's a real gap. And I've raised it at the fire board at the LGA, but it seems to...
Certainly through the National Fire Chiefs Council, we are trying to lobby in those areas to say you're building in issues that is foreseeable. But of course, people are talking about cost-benefit analysis as to us. Right, okay, well...
It's just a notification. It's not... We're not talking about planning application that adds £500 on it. It's just you've got to notify us if you're changing your building.
It would be useful.
Something. Had you finished, Nick?
Yes, I think.
David Hughes.
Yeah, I think there's loads of great stuff happening there. In terms of the schools' safety zones, I think they're fantastic. I think that's a really good example of some of the great work there. The only thing I sort of thought about was, in a sense, was how are schools engaged? How do schools get engaged? How do we work with them? And then the other thought I thought was, is Home Pierpont the right place for city schools as well? Especially those city schools that are in the north of the city, in a sense, really. And I think what might be useful on that would be to see a spread of where the schools come from in the future, really. And the second bit was the great stuff. I think reading all the way through it, this kind of 18-metre building thing is a huge problem when loads and loads of developers know the regulations and they're going to 17.99 metres. It's an 18-metre building. It's got great problems within it, and it's escaping legislation. And I'm sure probably you as a group are at least getting together with other fire authorities from across the country, really, and trying to highlight that and trying to make sure that we get the right kind of get your elbows in there and make those voices heard.
Yes, so on those issues, certainly with the education, I suppose what a lot of it's predicated on is the location that we can get. So we need a big location. Yeah. We need a location that we can bring a lot of school children in a quick succession. It's got to be fairly open plan, if you like. And obviously finance is an issue. Yeah. Home Pierpont kindly let us have a facility for nothing, same as Ramsey House School do. So, and we use Ashfield Fire Station on a lot of occasions. So a lot of it is down to cost. One of the challenges that we do get is that what our class is the riskiest schools are sometimes the most deprived areas.
That's exactly why I'm asking the question.
So then the pupil premium that the schools get is less. Yeah. And the challenge that we get is those schools being able to fund to get to safety zone. Now, we can't pay for 3,500 children to attend. I was given an example last week where the children were having to ask for contribution to take them to the safety zone, and I think it was in the region of £6 to £8 because of the diesel prices and everything else, and they paid that. In some of the inner city schools, that's not going to occur. So one of the things the team's looking at is to see if we can bring it more into the city centre. And one of the areas we're looking at is potentially Stockhill Fire Station, where we've got a piece of land on the side of that. It may be a smaller venue, but it may target those schools better, and we may get I won't say the right pupil, but
pupils you need to get to.
Correct. So we are looking at the locations, and that's ever evolving, and it's a balance between cost, suitability of the location. In terms of national lobbying, National Fire Chief Councils have a unit which is called the Protection Policy Reform Unit. They're specifically experienced fire safety officers of long-standing that work with central government looking at fire protection reform and the policies. So government ministers, civil servants may have indications of where they want to take the sector. They then use the PPRU as a consultation sounding board, and they have regular meetings with all of the 45 fire rescue services and heads of protection such as myself with views of government and taking our views back. So there is an interface, and that is a funded lobby group, for want of a better word really, back into government. And we've had some success. You may have heard the term PEEPS, which is a personal emergency evacuation plan that came out of Grenfell. The Fire and Rescue Services had specific concerns about the recommendations that come out from government. The PPRU lobbied back hard into government, and there's a second consultation coming out now with some reforms to that. So it is quite effective in terms of where we're at.
My understanding is about the height is that 18 metres is what's currently in scope for the introduction of the Act. So over time, the likelihood is that more buildings will come under the Act. That's fine. That probably gives you more powers. But Councillor Rain's point of view is more buildings that come into our purview means more inspections that are required. Right, how do we do that? Now that'll be an issue for officers to take away and kick that around, and how do we do it, and then for members to support any recommendations we might need. But my understanding is as it's introduced, it's 18 metres and above because it's a scale that we can get to grips with. And then over time, the legislation should pick up the 17.99 metre building. And my view is that it could be something wedged between 4 stories, wedged between 2 takeaways, or 18 stories high, which is the most risky. Well, it depends.
Yeah.
But there's also a cultural issue in the sector that we've highlighted, that if we make the regulations 18 metres, you're quite right, the building 17.99. If we make them 11 metres, it's 10.99. And what we're trying to get across the sector is we're interested in keeping the residents and members of the public safe in these buildings, and they may have a different agenda to what we've got. So there's a constant sort of clash really in terms of, you know, commercial issues and safety issues, but that's our game.
Can I just circle back David's point on the school safety zones? Is it possible, you think, for members of this committee to attend one so we can see how it works? Has it gone out? Oh, has it? All right.
I believe so, Chair. Yeah.
All right.
So I'll check
Yeah,
that up as well.
absolutely, more than welcome.
All right,
Absolutely.
excellent. Had you finished? Yeah, all right, Nicola.
Thank you. So slightly on the CRMP and our previous discussion on change of use buildings and all of that sort of stuff. So obviously students would be a very low risk group, but some of the buildings that they're in could be potentially problematic in that they're in office conversions in the city centre or lots of these high-rise buildings. They might potentially be responsible for some of the false alarms, so we might stop going to incidents. So is there work to do with the students and the universities?
Okay, so you're aware we've got this Charlie profile, which concentrates on the disabled.
Yeah, it's the opposite of students.
They don't meet the Charlie profile.
Yeah.
There are 22, probably 24 now, buildings that I would class are in special measures within the city centre. They are high-rise residential buildings. Of the occupancy of those 24, the significant majority is student accommodation. So what we've done as a service, we've done a joint community reassurance and engagement event at those buildings, and we've knocked on every flat door with protection officers, response crews and prevention to give fire safety advice.
Yeah.
Culturally within the service it seems a bit strange because we're going into modern high-rise residential accommodation and we're knocking on doors of 18, 19-year-old students who've got no mobility issues. The issue is that they're at risk from that building environment. So we're giving them a bespoke fire safety guidance for that building in terms of needs to escape, what the quickest way out of the building is, what they should do, whether it's a stay put, whether it's a simultaneous evacuation. So yeah, absolutely, we've done that, and that took place all last summer throughout. So we have targeted thousands of students as well, as I say, and I suppose we've got a mixed response really, because they didn't probably quite see the danger that they're in a very nice new, brand new student accommodation block, not understanding the nuances of fire protection issues.
Well, I certainly, when I was a student, had so many 2 a.m. false alarms when people had toast or whatever, or smoked in the room, or all of that stuff. So.
And you're right to raise it. One of the significant fires we've had in the UK was the Cube at Bolton, which was a predominantly student accommodation in a high-rise residential building.
Thank you. My other question was just very briefly on the fire safety audits and the business safety checks. Are we going to meet the targets? It's very hard to sort of extrapolate. I don't know how it phases over the year.
I'm aware that my chief forester sat here. No, we're probably not, because of the complexity, the resource requirements, and the number of fire safety auditors, inspectors I've currently got. I've probably got 11 full-time equivalents at this point in time, and that is not enough to deliver it. Bearing in mind, we've also got the building consultations that are coming in at a fast rate to knots. Complaints are increasing. So I think that's a challenging stretch target, and I won't be surprised if I'm here in October's community safety saying that we'll be behind target on that. But performance is on the up. I think the trajectory is in the correct way, but it's certainly a challenging target, and that will be more than we've ever delivered in.
I was going to say it's quite a stretch target even from the peaks before, will we be reaching similar to those peaks, or will it be below those?
I would want to reach similar peaks. Absolutely, we want similar peaks where we've been before. It is a big stretch target to get to 12.
Yeah, thank you.
Roger?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm back to item 230, I'm afraid. I welcome the fact that you've got the JATE away and working in collaboration with the Nottingham City and others in inspecting these buildings, and I think I'm right in saying, as it says in the report, you are just looking at high-rise residential, not office or anything other. So great, you focus on that. And you say these inspections have covered 59 buildings, and you've got 84 buildings over 18 metres still to go and 62 below the 18 metres left to inspect. It begs the question of me, have you a plan? Because I always like a plan. Sort of, is there a time frame? It's sort of left to inspect by. Is there a date somewhere, 1 year, 5 year, 10, 20 years down the track? And linked with that is clearly resources and money. So there's a time frame question there. I mean, if you add the two together, there's 146 to go, 84 and 62. You say you've done 59, but I don't know how long it took you to do 59. Could have been a year, 2 year, 3 year, I don't know. Could have been 5 since Grenfell, for all I know. But, I mean, are you trying to do it all in-house? And I accept the point about the shortage of skills and competency generally in the marketplace and resources within-house. Have you considered about putting some of the workload to consultants that specialise in these to accelerate the programme? It just seems to me that there's 84 buildings over 18 metres that nobody's gone and looked at yet, and that concerns me. And when are they going to look at them? And assuming they're all done, a lot of questions here, I know.
No, it's fine.
Will you be doing a follow-up report? Say, is the plan to go, everything's fine on such and such a day, signed off, great. Nothing we know is wrong here. But we all know people do things, change doors, things wear out. Would you be going back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, always in a programme in perpetuity for as long as the asset is there? Sorry to put a lot of questions there, but it concerns me.
A holistic response, I suppose.
Thank you.
Into all of that. So central government directed us to a piece of work in terms of identifying high-rise residential buildings within the city and county.
Yep.
They thought that were on required inspecting. We were given a 12-month time frame to do an initial audit of those buildings. So that was called the Building Risk Review. And we were given until December last year to complete the Building Risk Review, which was very much quick and dirty. Let's have a look at the building stock we've got, let's have a look at some of the issues, report on that, and then that can form the basis of the JATE's work. I suppose the JATE's work in terms of the statute, there's two areas of legislation, which is the Housing Act and the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. And we're responsible for implementing the Fire Safety Regulatory Reform Order. And the City Council in this instance are the responsible authority, statutory authority for the Housing Act. So we can use both pieces of legislation as part of the JATE. Predominantly is the Housing Act. So we enforce some of the Housing Act because it's more flexible and wide ranging than the Regulatory Reform Order. The Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order is only in common areas of high-rise residential buildings. So it's only in communal areas, stairwells, etc. So we've got very, very limited powers. And now there's been some amendments to that, so front doors, glazing, fire alarm systems in those buildings. Housing Act, I'm not an expert on the Housing Act, but it's far more wide-ranging than that. So we've got both of those powers. Both City Council and the Fire and Rescue Service will have their own separate risk-based inspection programme. So some of these will form part of our risk-based inspection programme. I suppose where I'm going with this is it took us probably 3 years, I believe, Jake's been set up, so it predates my time so far to do these buildings. Yes, I would predict it's probably going to take another probably 5 years to cover all of those. But this is a bit like the Forth Bridge, because as we're doing these, there are far more buildings coming online in Nottingham. You look at the skyline in Nottingham now, and more of these buildings are being constructed. We can't outsource the work because you need warranted powers, and there's only our fire safety inspectors that have the warranted powers issued by this authority to issue enforcement of prohibition. I'm not sure about the City Council, but again, I would imagine it's a similar sort of issue, that we've got those statutory responsibilities that you can't outsource. So I suppose in terms of reassurance, we have done an audit of those buildings. We are aware of what the quality of the buildings are. But some of these are complex issues and will take years to resolve.
Well, thanks for the responses, yes. That's useful. I just have a concern when you think it's around another 5 years to get through those other 84 above 18 metres, but there we are.
There are 3 inspecting officers, so 1 dedicated from the City Council plus a senior environmental health officer and 2 from my team, and they're not solely dedicated due to the complexity of time. So that's probably 3 individuals that are putting the shoulder behind this work.
No, I understand your resources, but
But some of this will be superseded by the building safety regulator for the new legislation that's coming in, which we're multidisciplinary team. So I envisage that the JATE will form part of the building safety regulator in years to come. And I think a lot of the work we're doing is almost a sort of preamble to the building safety regulator coming online later next year.
Later next year?
Yeah, probably October 2023, depending on the legislative route.
Okay.
Nick?
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I see your point, and I'm concerned about failing the targets, but it's a resource issue, isn't it? We're looking at how we can look at resources innovatively, and without making a political point. I mean, quite frankly, people are making a lot of money out of these buildings, or they're going up regularly, should be contributing more to public realms so the fire service can do it. I would absolutely oppose anything being outsourced to consultants. It's a statutory duty that the fire authority should be funded more, and obviously it's appropriate if people are building lots of buildings to have some sort of responsibility to pay something back. And that's an issue outside of us, I suppose. Apart from in terms of lobbying, government needs to look at the funding, because it won't just be a Nottinghamshire issue. This will be an issue in Manchester, Leeds, London, wherever it is, isn't it? As the work gets more complex, we're required to do these. It's going to be, and the thing is, we need to keep these things in-house, where they're done properly, outside of a profit motive, so we can be assured that the number one thing that people are looking at is safety, rather than you hand them out to consultants, which I wouldn't agree with anyway. There could be a tick box approach. We've already seen now some sections of the private sector have cut corners, you mentioned it, I'm not alluding to everybody, in order to make a profit, and some of the first things that go are fire safety. You know, it's that's I would suggest possibly a problem. So it's difficult. All we can do is look at the resources in this authority, but it's going to continually be a problem, and if we fail to meet targets, then it's going to have to be mentioned by fire officers or people at national level, isn't it? Because it's going to be something I think that affects places everywhere.
And the further challenge we have out there in the sector is that there are no qualified out-of-work fire safety inspectors due to the nature that we have to grow our own, and that process takes between 18 months and 2 years to get qualified fire safety inspectors. So if we want one now, we have to recruit them, and in 2 years' time they'll probably come online and can be solo doing the audit. So again, it's a real challenge for us as a sector.
And I think going back to that's part of the tactic around the business safety checks as well, is that we've got firefighters on fire appliances who should be keeping their eyes out for more things. It's a little bit like when they do a safe and well visit. If it's in a high-rise building doing a safe and well visit, they should be able to look at the communal areas while they walk into the flat that they're doing the safe and well visit on. It's the kind of every contact counts. So we've got to try and look for opportunities to identify risk in other areas. Your point, Councillor, about going back and doing the revisits, the scale of the revisit depends on the action that we've seen. If it's a compliant building, I'll see you in 6 years' time kind of thing. Actually, if it's a prohibition or enforcement, that's now creating workload as well. So that takes time in terms of enforcement. What I would sort of say that for the purposes, we're filming this sort of thing, I have a view about, is the responsibility of people who make money and run these buildings to make sure they're safe for the people that live and use them. And we will use all of our powers where we see people failing to meet, the basic minimum standards that the law requires of them. And I have to make that statement to Chief Officer because that's the law asks me to do that. So I would ask anybody, we need to lobby it. We are doing that nationally, and resources will become more in focus as years are going by. The country is in the condition it's in, and resources will be necessary. Either we move them around what we've got and take a risk-based approach about where we don't do some work to put it in other areas, or we get additional funding, whichever the case may be.
I think there's obviously a clear difference, isn't there, with this, that these areas where we are being asked to do more work in a certain area, but the private sector aren't funding it. In many respects, councils have the opportunity to put charges on land, etc. If they have to do work, it takes years to recover, but we're not being able to face that. So what's the budget gap next year? 2 million or something?
Without confirmation, which we'll get later in the year, you've got about 1.7 million that we're doing in year now of temporary measures that look like they may turn into 2 million for next year.
So we're making more savings, but clearly needing more resource in areas. I mean, Bryn's just said if we need somebody in 2 years, we need to be employing them now. We're doing that in place teams. What you and I were discussing before the meeting about project officers at councils who are building buildings, designing parks, that sort of thing. We're growing graduates now because we know that shortage is coming. I'm guessing you're looking at doing the same thing now because the shortage is here, but it's how it's funded. And I don't know the solution because obviously this is national legislation about if you're building this building, you need to make an additional contribution that isn't ring-fenced to allow us to pay for some of that work. I wonder, I mean, given we are a small authority, whether we invite Ian Stevens in to join us on Zoom at one of our meetings, who's the chair of the LJ Fire Board, he's the deputy leader of the Isle of Wight, and just ask him, raise some of these concerns with him, and just so we've raised it at national level, and then he can see if he can get that through the LGA as a recommendation. At least, instead of us always keep talking about it, raise it with people who might have the ears of government. I'm sure he'd come.
I wonder, Chair, whether we do that at something like a members' seminar rather than...
Maybe.
Because it can be a bit more open and discussive.
I'm very happy to phone him and get him to... I don't think he'll come all the way from the Isle of Wight, but I'm
No,
sure
but
he'll come to...
in terms of Teams.
Yeah, Teams or Zoom or something.
Yeah.
And he's actually quite a nice guy, so I'm sure he'll listen, even if he can't win, he'll try, I'm sure.
Okay.
Did all members have all their question points raised? Robert, did you have anything?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's everything on the agenda. Thank you, officers, and answers. And thank you, members. I'm not sure the date of the next meeting, but I'll see you all then. Thank you.